Hola, comrades. Today's topic of interest, Lorde. 2018 may not be the worst year for music that I can remember. That would probably be 2014. But it has been the most barren. Save for a few outliers like Taylor Swift's surprise hit Delicate, there are a few songs that have been both successful and demonstrably pop. Most of the biggest songs released this year have been hip-hop, but even rap fans have been left with mixed feelings thanks to the rise of mumble rap, and emo rap, and SoundCloud rap, and a whole slew of other subgenres that I have trouble differentiating. I don't innately mind that the music landscape is dour. There's nothing wrong with dour if there's depth, or nuance, or intelligence behind it. But the dour songs dominating the charts are no more thoughtful than the sunshiny songs they replaced. In fact, many of them are much less thoughtful than the average effervescent pop song, even the average disposable pop tunes trying much harder than its average listener can discern. Meanwhile, many of these dour songs are thrown together with little to no effort, but to their listeners, those flaws are acceptable or even commendable because they make the songs more relatable. So let's rewind time. Let's return to a year before the mainstream decided that relatability equaled quality. 2013. This was admittedly not a good year for popular music, but I'd take it in a heartbeat over the inner desolation of 2018. And let's focus on a young New Zealander who broke into the mainstream that year in the most disruptive, bombastic way possible. 17-year-old Ella Yelich O'Connor scored a #1 hit that year under her stage name, Lorde. The name of the song was Royals, and it topped the Billboard Hot 100 for 9 straight weeks. According to the year-end Top 100, it was only the 15th most popular song that year, but that doesn't convey its domination or cultural relevance. For the latter half of 2013, it was the preeminent song in the zeitgeist. Everyone was enamored by this bold new talent and her denouncing of the luxury porn that had increasingly invaded the psychosis of modernity, even as everyday people watched the gains of the post-war era continue to slip away. A long and successful career in the mainstream was hers if she wanted it. But instead she disappeared from the pop landscape, launching only one more single into the top 10, the downbeat phantasmagorical Team. This was in part because she did not release another album until 2017, but when that album, Melodrama, was released, it flopped. Its lead-off single, Greenlight, also flopped, only reaching number 19 in the top 100 and quickly dropping off the chart. Compared to other comebacks, most notably Adele, with 25, this was a disaster. Was this because Greenlight was bad? No, it was propulsive yet raw. Was this because Melodrama was bad? No, it's a daring cacophony of visceral hollowness and introspection that not only captures the malaise of my generation, but diagnoses and analyzes it. Melodrama is the album my generation needs. It's remarkably poignant, aching, wistful, and mature. It's an antidote to both the vapid platitudes offered by an establishment that desperately wants us to believe that everything is fine, and the nihilistic pretentiousness of the mumble-mouthed crowd that's encroaching on the mainstream. The commercial failure of Melodrama, one of the greatest albums released this century, is infuriating to me, but it is not surprising. This isn't the kind of music the mainstream public wants to hear. There are no platitudes, there are no simplicities. It's a fervent, unembellished, complicated album, both sonically and lyrically. It offers no easy answers. It is a cross-section of the life of an incredibly sharp and critical young woman who is forced to use those analytical faculties on herself after the blasé facade she hid behind was obliterated by the pressures of adulthood. Though the sound of our music has become more depressed, it is still as banal as before. The message of "my life is terrible and everything sucks" is not more demanding than the message of "my life is great and everything is wonderful." There's nothing inherently wrong with either sentiment, but both tend to result in simplistic art. No boundaries are being pushed. Nothing is challenged. Nothing is inspected. The singer is not required to change or question the choices they've made, or seriously analyze why they feel like they do. This is even true of Royals as much as I respect it, which is why the song became so popular. The sentiment is refreshing but straightforward. Rapping and singing about a superficial and unattainable life of luxury is not interesting or thoughtful. You will never have that life, so stop dreaming about it. Free yourself from a society that fantasizes and fetishizes extravagance. It's a direct, incisive critique, but there's an air of smugness to it that takes the place of meaningful depth. This chill, above-it-all, borderline pretentious tone can be copied, as demonstrated by the success of artists such as Dea and Alessia Cara. Lorde is a more competent musical presence than either of those two, and she's a talented lyricist, but during her long hiatus, these other artists were able to slip into the hole she left. The musical landscape had little enough appreciation for her talents that her dexterous writing abilities received no more attention than a truly stupid controversy over whether she was racist because the bloated excess she targeted had dominated the hip-hop genre. Thus, it's no surprise that it was willing to replace her. To return to emo rap, the wave of it that's dominated the charts lately is bad because it's vapid, and it's bad because the production is so threadbare that a complete neophyte like myself could do better. And it's bad because it believes relatability is a replacement for competence, and pure heroine era Lorde is guilty of none of these charges. But it's also bad because it's myopic, and pure heroine era Lorde was definitely that. Self-impressed adolescent self-centeredness runs through both emo rap and pure heroine era Lorde. That's not to say all conspicuous solipsism is equal. If Juice WRLD, with his warblings about all girls being the same and his ex being evil because she broke up with him, is the jock who falls asleep halfway through class, then teenage Lorde, with her classy, brutal takedowns of elites and those who thoughtlessly aspire to be like them, is the straight-A student who could answer the questions the teacher asks but chooses not to. They are not the same, but just because one is better does not mean either is admirable. Melodrama is a tremendous step forward for Lorde. If she made an album with the same tone and stylings of pure heroine, I would have been annoyed. Lines like, "I'm kinda over being told to throw my hands up in the air, so there," are acceptable coming from a teenager living at the tail end of the club boom that dominated the late 2000s and early 2010s, but if they came from the mouth of the same woman several years later, after she had attained life experience and also after the club boom had not only died but been buried, their blasé coolness would have felt more strained. Melodrama is an album clearly made by a young adult who is struggling with forces she can't quite understand. But that's why it's great. The entire album is covered with the haze of a woman who's been taught by the tumult in her life that her earlier pose of superiority was hollow. She wants to figure out her relationships, but she can't because she can't even figure out herself, leading to a series of empty sexual and drug-related experiences that persists because to stop would be to expose herself to the hollowness that lies beneath the carnal rush. This is best demonstrated on Sober, when after declaring herself and her partner to be king and queen of the weekend, asks, "What will we do when we're sober?" Early Lorde positioned herself and her scene above the madness, while taking potshots at those whom she considered to be below her. She may not have represented the traditional monolithic world of glamour and opulence, but she was the queen of her own domain, as Royals makes clear.
It will never be royal. It's running our blood. That kind of luck's just ain't for us. We crave a different kind of buzz. Let me be your ruler. You can call me creepy. Baby, let me live that fantasy.
In Melodrama, however, Lorde positions herself in the thrall of the madness. Faced with the actual problems of those who were excluded from her clique of blasé, bored adolescents, Lorde succumbs to the chaos, and she's willing to admit that. This is a tremendously self-aware album, hence the title. Melodrama is drama that is so overblown and terribly histrionic that it is impossible to take seriously. Think of soap operas or pretentious Mad Men clones. Lorde characterizes her own problems as a melodrama because she still has that above-it-all condescension that ran through her first album, but she's focusing it on herself. She recognizes that her problems are those of an average young adult, relating around drinking and partying and trying to figure out how to have an actual relationship, and how imposing and all-consuming these problems seem to her is absurd. She exaggerates her emotions to depict them in a more overtly excessive light, such as in Rider in the Dark, when she sings, "I'll love you till my breathing stops, I'll love you till you call the cops on me." But she does not hate herself for these emotions. She's mature enough to acknowledge that they exist and that she is forced to work through them. Pure Heroine is an outwardly focused album from a teenager who thought herself above the crowd. Melodrama is an inwardly focused album from a young woman who's realized she's not. But the sad truth is that if this album had been more like Pure Heroine, it would have performed much better. Masses want songs that reassure them that they are understood and that they are right and that they don't need to change. Melodrama is the exact opposite of that. Its songs are about how hard it is to understand yourself. Its songs are about being wrong. Its songs are about needing to change and not knowing how. This is not the album that my generation, which for the record I define as those who, like Lorde, were pre-adolescent children when social media took over the world, wants, or even deserves, but it is the album that my generation needs. Lorde wrote before the release of Melodrama that writing Pure Heroine was my way of enshrining our teenage glory, putting it up in lights forever so that part of me never dies, and this record, well, this one is about what comes next. She called her younger self that glossy idiot god, princess of her childhood streets, handmade and ugly and sure of herself, which sounds like how a beat poet would describe themselves, honestly. Melodrama is, in a very direct sense, an album about the transition from a self-assured teenager to a mature, nuanced adult, and that is a messy transition. It's not pleasant. We don't want to be challenged with the hard truths of that transition. We're terrified of it, and so is Lorde. That's why the album is so potent and poignant and haunting. In the best song of the album, Liability, a somber ballad that quickly becomes dreadfully heartbreaking, she discusses how she's too intense for people, so they simply use her until they no longer find her enjoyable, at which point they discard her. The title sounds like an insult hurled at her during a particularly raw fight, and it hits like an atom bomb. Her intensity and passion, which she held up in Pure Heroine as separating herself from the fakers, has become a detriment, and that terrifies her.
I do my best to meet her demands, play a romance, we slow dance in the living room, but all that a stranger would see is one girl swaying along, stroking a cheek. They say, you're a little much for me, you're a liability, you're a little much for me. So they pull back, make other plans. I understand, I'm a liability. Get you wild, make you leave. I'm a little much for everyone.
This is an album about the facade of nonchalance being torn down, but its bloody, gooey, messy honesty reveals why that facade existed. The apathetic, jaded posturing of my generation is not a reflection of inner intellectual and emotional sterility, as the flood of think pieces about it written by 75-year-old white dudes would suggest. Rather, it's a defense mechanism. The rise of social media has brought us closer together, but it has also pushed us further apart. We have more connections now, but those connections matter less. They're more ephemeral. We're filled to the brim with plaintive despair. We ache for a connection that we can hold on to. We ache for someone to whom we can spill our most desperate desires and fears and longings. When we can't find that, we pretend that we're cool. We pretend that we don't care. We want to be seen as admirable. We want to be seen as hip. The image of who you are matters more in the social media age because that's all others see of you. While you could display yourself in all your gooey, confused, sentimental messiness, you don't. Because you're afraid you won't be liked, and if you're not liked, you'll never be able to assuage the raging chaos coursing through you. In Pure Heroine, she embodies this image. She has internalized it, but in Melodrama, she rejects that image. She reveals the tangled, convoluted, uncontrollable flares that exist beneath the veneer of euphoria and satisfaction. In Tennis Court on Pure Heroine, she sings, "It's a new art form showing people how little we care." But on Sober, on Melodrama, she sings, "We pretend that we just don't care, but we care." Sober is the most important song on Melodrama. It's the second song on the album after the propulsive album opener Greenlight. As such, it sets much of the tone and direction of the album. And those lines are the most important lines on Sober. Lorde has described them as the essence of the album. They are its thesis statement. This is an album about inchoate maturity starting to emerge out of the ruins of adolescent coolness, but it's not there yet. This isn't an album that provides easy answers, or even really any answers at all. The closest she gets is accepting that she can move on from the breakup that largely inspired the album's content, and accepting that drugs and alcohol are not going to solve her problems. The final song, Perfect Places, is reminiscent of the final song in Modest Mouse's seminal album Good News for People Who Love Bad News, called The Good Times Are Killing Me. It's not a note of positivity, but it's a reflective piece about the negativity and hollowness in Lorde's life. And that's not nothing. Identifying one's problems is, after all, the first step to solving those problems.
All the nights spent off our faces, trying to find these perfect places. What the hell are perfect places?
This is the rare album that is only going to grow in stature over time. It's already received a lot of critical acclaim, but over time it's going to be seen as one of the great albums of the 2010s. It's such a profound depiction of not only loneliness and longing, but the shame and humiliation associated with such emotions. Lorde has always been best when self-reflecting, as evident in the best song from Pure Heroine, Ribs, an ethereal piece about longing for the simpler joys of childhood, but Melodrama is a step above that. The forlorn center of the album is not hidden by the propulsive melodies, but rather revealed and exacerbated by them. It is such an incisive, unrelenting depiction of her psychoses. She journeys through herself and finds not only catharsis, but understanding, but she has not found any full-throated, manifesto-esque, sweeping conclusions. She's not here to offer solutions. She's here to offer insight into the fires and darknesses of a turbulent period of life, whose truth is often ignored by those of us who are swirling through it, and often forgotten by those who have moved on to more stable ground. My generation doesn't even know if there is stable ground waiting for us, but with Melodrama we are provided an intimate portrait into our great throbbing lows and our tenuous, hollow highs. We can at least know ourselves better. So if you liked what you saw today, consider donating to my Patreon so I can produce even more intimately powerful content. Also, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that melodramatic stuff. Adios, comrades!